The wind carried secrets across the Montana plains that September night, and Emma Grace whispered her last hope into its restless embrace before collapsing at the gate of a ranch she'd never seen. When the cowboy found her there at dawn, clutching a letter that could change everything, he said words that would echo through both their hearts forever. "Stay, if that wind brought you here." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Morning mist clung to the Bitterroot Valley like a shroud, hiding the scars that 27 years of hard living had carved into the landscape. The Double R Ranch stretched as far as the eye could see, a testament to generations of stubborn determination and the kind of love that builds legacies from dust and dreams. But for the past 3 years, it had been home to only one soul, Jackson Reid, a man who talked more to his horses than to people, and carried ghosts in his eyes that no amount of Montana sunshine could chase away. Jackson had been up since 4, same as every morning, moving through chores with the mechanical precision of someone who'd learned that routine was the only thing standing between sanity and the abyss. Coffee black as midnight, cattle fed, fences checked. The rhythm never changed because change had already taken too much from him. His wife, Sarah. Their unborn daughter. The future they'd planned in whispered conversations on this very porch. The September air carried the promise of winter, crisp and clean, cutting through the fog that rolled down from the mountains like the breath of sleeping giants. Jackson loaded hay bales into the back of his pickup, muscles moving with practiced efficiency, when something caught his peripheral vision. A figure at the front gate, motionless as a scarecrow but wrong somehow. Too small. Too fragile. He squinted through the morning haze, setting down the bale he'd been hefting. The figure was a woman, that much was clear now, but she wasn't standing. She was kneeling, or maybe collapsed, one hand pressed against the weathered wooden post that marked the entrance to his property. Her other hand clutched something white against her chest, and even from 100 yards away, Jackson could see she was shaking. Jackson's instincts, honed by years of ranch life and military service before that, kicked in immediately. He vaulted into the truck and gunned the engine, gravel spraying behind him as he tore down the dirt road toward the gate. As he got closer, details emerged that made his chest tighten with recognition of a particular kind of desperation. The woman wore a thin cotton dress that had once been yellow but was now stained with dust and something darker. Her dark hair hung in tangled waves around shoulders that shook with exhaustion or cold or both. He parked 10 feet away and approached slowly, the way he would a wounded animal. She didn't look up when his boots crunched on the gravel, didn't seem to register his presence at all. Her lips were moving, but no sound emerged except for the whisper of wind through the grass. "Ma'am?" Jackson's voice was rusty from disuse, gentler than he'd spoken to another human being in months. "You all right?" She lifted her head then, and Jackson felt something shift in his chest like tectonic plates realigning. Her eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray and green and full of lightning, set in a face that would have been beautiful if it wasn't hollowed out by whatever hell she'd been walking through. But it was the look in those eyes that stopped his breath, hope and terror warring with each other, the expression of someone who'd been running so long she'd forgotten how to stop. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice like sandpaper on silk. "I didn't mean to trespass. I was just—" She looked down at the paper in her hands, then back up at him. "Are you Jackson Reid?" The question hit him like a physical blow. Nobody called him by his full name anymore. The few neighbors who still checked on him called him Jack or Reid, and most folks in town had given up trying to coax him back into the land of the living. Depends who's asking. She struggled to her feet, swaying slightly, and Jackson instinctively stepped forward to steady her. The moment his hand touched her elbow, she flinched but didn't pull away. "My name is Emma Grace Sullivan. Emma Grace McKenna now, I suppose, though I don't know for how much longer." Her laugh was bitter as winter wind. "I have a letter. It's from your wife." The world tilted sideways. Jackson felt the blood drain from his face, felt his knees threaten to buckle. "My wife's been dead 3 years." "I know." Emma Grace's voice broke on the words. "She wrote this before she died. Sent it to my sister in Denver with instructions to give it to me if I ever needed. If I ever had nowhere else to go." Jackson stared at the envelope in her trembling hands, recognizing Sarah's careful script even from a distance. His wife had been a letter writer, always sending notes and cards to friends scattered across the country, maintaining connections he'd never bothered to nurture. But this letter, addressed to someone he'd never heard of, felt like a message from beyond the grave. "Sarah never mentioned you," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. There had been so many things Sarah never mentioned, parts of her past she'd kept folded away like pressed flowers in a book he'd never thought to read. "We weren't close." Emma Grace's grip tightened on the letter. "But we were family, distant cousins who found each other through one of those ancestry websites. We exchanged maybe a dozen emails over 2 years, but Sarah—" She paused, tears tracking down her dirt-stained cheeks. "Sarah had a way of seeing straight into your soul, even through a computer screen. She knew I was in trouble long before I admitted it to myself." Jackson's throat worked around words that wouldn't come. Sarah had always been like that, able to read people the way he read weather patterns, instinctively understanding things that escaped everyone else. It would be just like her to reach out to someone in need, to plant seeds of kindness that would bloom long after she was gone. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "What kind of trouble?" he asked, though part of him didn't want to know. He'd had enough of other people's pain, enough of carrying burdens that weren't his own. Emma Grace's eyes darted past him to the ranch house visible in the distance, then back to his face. "The kind that follows you wherever you go. The kind that finds you even when you think you've run far enough." She took a shaky breath. "My husband, ex-husband now, I hope. He's not the man I thought I married. When I finally found the courage to leave, to file for divorce, he made it clear that he'd rather see me dead than see me free." Jackson studied her face, noting the way she held herself, like someone accustomed to expecting blows. The careful way she spoke, as if each word might be used against her later. He'd seen that posture before, in the villages of Afghanistan, where women learned to make themselves invisible to survive. "You run far?" he asked. "3 states, changed my name, changed my hair, changed everything I could think of." Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "But he found me anyway. Always finds me. I've been driving for 2 days straight, sleeping in my car, trying to stay ahead of him. This morning I ran out of gas about 5 miles down the road. I walked here because—" She held up the letter again. "Because this was the only address I had left." Jackson looked at the envelope, at this stranger who'd materialized out of the morning mist carrying words from his dead wife, and felt something crack open in his chest that he'd thought was sealed forever. Emma Grace was watching him with the desperate hope of someone throwing their last coin into a wishing well, and he realized that whatever Sarah had written in that letter, it had been enough to bring this broken woman to his doorstep in search of sanctuary. "What's the letter say?" he asked. Emma Grace's hands shook as she opened the envelope, unfolding a single sheet of paper covered in Sarah's familiar handwriting. "She says you're the best man she ever knew. Says you have a heart big enough to hold the whole world's pain, even when you think it's too broken to hold anything at all." Her voice caught. "She says if I ever needed a safe place to heal, to remember that love doesn't die when people do. It just finds new ways to keep protecting the people who need it most." Jackson closed his eyes, hearing Sarah's voice in those words, feeling the weight of her faith in him like a stone in his chest. She'd always believed he was better than he knew himself to be, had seen potential in him that he'd never been able to recognize. Even in death, she was still trying to save him from himself. "She's wrong," he said quietly. "I'm not that man anymore." "Maybe not," Emma Grace agreed, surprising him. "But maybe she wasn't writing to the man you are now. Maybe she was writing to the man you could be again." The wind picked up, rustling through the grass and carrying with it the scent of rain from the mountains. Jackson opened his eyes and looked at this stranger who'd whispered her hopes into the wind and somehow found her way to his gate, and he thought about signs and second chances, and the way Sarah had always believed that the universe had a way of putting people exactly where they needed to be. "You got anywhere else to go?" he asked. Emma Grace shook her head, and Jackson saw her brace herself for rejection, for another door slamming in her face. Instead, he stepped back and gestured toward the ranch house. "Then I reckon you better come inside. We can figure out the rest from there." The relief that flooded her face was so profound it was almost painful to witness. "You don't even know me," she whispered. No, Jackson agreed. But Sarah did. And if she thought you were worth saving, then that's good enough for me. As they walked toward the house, Emma Grace clutching Sarah's letter like a lifeline, Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that the wind had indeed brought her here for reasons neither of them fully understood yet. The morning mist was beginning to burn off, revealing the mountains in all their September glory, and for the first time in 3 years, the silence of the Double R Ranch didn't feel quite so heavy. Behind them, the gate stood open, as if waiting for whatever came next. The ranch house had been built to last. Sturdy log walls and wide windows that let in the kind of light that made everything look possible. But as Jackson pushed open the front door, he saw it through Emma Grace's eyes and realized how far he'd let things slide. Dust motes danced in the morning sun, highlighting surfaces that hadn't seen a proper cleaning in months. Empty whiskey bottles lined the kitchen counter like amber soldiers, and the air carried the stale scent of a man who'd forgotten how to live instead of just surviving. Emma Grace stepped inside carefully, as if afraid her presence might shatter something fragile. Her eyes moved over the space, taking in the family photos that Jackson hadn't been able to bear looking at but couldn't bring himself to put away. Sarah smiled from every frame, her blonde hair catching light like spun gold, her eyes bright with the kind of joy that seemed impossible now. She was beautiful, Emma Grace said softly, stopping in front of a photo of Sarah sitting on the porch swing, one hand resting on her rounded belly. The picture had been taken just weeks before the accident, when their whole future had been mapped out in baby names and nursery colors. Jackson's throat tightened. Yeah, she was. Emma Grace turned away from the photos, perhaps sensing the minefield she'd stumbled into. I should clean up. I know I look like I've been dragged behind a truck. She gestured vaguely at her stained dress, her tangled hair. Do you have somewhere I could wash up? Jackson pointed down the hallway. Bathroom's the second door on the right. There are clean towels in the closet, and I think Sarah left some clothes in the bedroom that might fit you. The words came out rougher than he'd intended, and he saw Emma Grace's shoulders tense. I'm sorry, she said quickly. I don't want to intrude on her things. I can make do with what I have. No. Jackson shook his head, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. Sarah would want them to be useful again. She never could stand waste, especially when someone was in need. While Emma Grace disappeared down the hallway, Jackson found himself moving through the house with new awareness, seeing the neglect through a stranger's eyes. He began gathering the empty bottles, dumping out ashtrays, opening windows to let in fresh air. It felt strange to care about appearances again, to feel the weight of someone else's presence in the space that had become his tomb. The sound of running water from the bathroom mixed with distant thunder from the mountains, where storm clouds were building for the afternoon rain that September always brought to this part of Montana. Jackson made coffee, real coffee, instead of the instant sludge he'd been living on, and found himself checking the refrigerator for actual food. A few eggs, some bread that was only slightly stale, butter that hadn't quite turned. Not much, but enough for a meal. 20 minutes later, Emma Grace emerged from the bathroom transformed. She'd found one of Sarah's old dresses, a simple blue cotton thing that brought out the color of her eyes and made her look younger, less haunted. Her dark hair was clean and braided back, revealing a face that might have been carved from marble if not for the warmth in her expression. Thank you, she said, gesturing at the dress. It fits perfectly. It's like she knew. She was always good at knowing things, Jackson said, then cleared his throat. I made eggs. You look like you haven't eaten in a while. They sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Jackson had shared thousands of meals with Sarah, where they'd planned their life together over morning coffee and evening conversations. But instead of feeling like a betrayal, Emma Grace's presence seemed to breathe life back into the space, to remind the house of its purpose. Emma Grace ate slowly, savoring each bite as if she couldn't quite believe it was real. I haven't had a home-cooked meal in weeks, she admitted. Been living on gas station food and whatever I could grab from drive-thrus. Where'd you start running from? Jackson asked, then immediately regretted the question. Sorry, none of my business. Oklahoma. Emma Grace's fork paused halfway to her mouth. I was working as a nurse in Tulsa. Thought I'd finally built something good. Met David at a hospital fundraiser. He was charming, successful, everything I thought I wanted. Her voice turned bitter. Turns out charm can hide a lot of ugly underneath. Jackson had heard variations of this story before, from other women in other places. The pattern was always the same. The gradual isolation, the escalating control, the moment when love revealed itself to be something else entirely. "When did you know?" he asked. Emma Grace set down her fork, her appetite suddenly gone. "The first time he hit me, I told myself it was stress from work, that he didn't mean it. The second time I made excuses about his difficult childhood. By the third time, I was so deep in his web that I couldn't see a way out." She looked up at Jackson, her eyes clear and direct. "It took me 2 years to find the courage to leave, and another 6 months to actually do it." Jackson felt a familiar rage building in his chest, the same fury that had driven him through 2 tours in Afghanistan, the need to protect the innocent from those who would prey on them. "He hurt you bad?" "Bad enough." Emma Grace's hand moved unconsciously to her ribs, and Jackson caught the gesture. "But the physical stuff wasn't the worst part. It was the way he made me believe I deserved it, that I was broken and lucky to have anyone who would put up with me. That's not true. I know that now." Emma Grace managed a small smile. "But knowing something in your head and believing it in your heart are 2 different things." Thunder rumbled closer now, and the first fat raindrops began to spatter against the windows. Jackson watched Emma Grace's face as she listened to the storm approaching, saw the way her shoulders relaxed for the first time since he'd found her at the gate. "I love storms," she said quietly. "David hated them. Said they were a waste of nature's energy, proof that the world was basically chaotic and destructive." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I used to stand on our balcony during thunderstorms, feeling like the lightning was calling to something wild in me that I'd forgotten existed." "Sarah loved storms too," Jackson found himself saying. "Used to dance in the rain like some kind of elemental spirit. Drove me crazy, worried she'd catch pneumonia or get struck by lightning." The memory caught him off guard, and he had to swallow hard before continuing. She said storms reminded her that nature wasn't meant to be tamed, that some things were supposed to be wild and free. Emma Grace's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "She sounds like she understood something important about life." "Yeah, she did." They sat in comfortable silence as the storm moved overhead, rain drumming on the roof with increasing intensity. Jackson found himself studying Emma Grace's profile, the way she tilted her head to listen to the thunder, the peace that seemed to settle over her features. For the first time in 3 years, the house didn't feel empty. "Can I ask you something?" Emma Grace said eventually. Jackson nodded, though he braced himself for questions he might not be ready to answer. "In her letters, Sarah mentioned that you'd lost your way after she died. She said you'd forgotten how to see the good in yourself." Emma Grace's voice was gentle, careful. "What did she mean?" Jackson stared out at the rain, gathering his thoughts. He'd never talked about the accident, not even to the grief counselor the doctor had insisted he see. But something about Emma Grace's presence, the way she'd shared her own pain so openly, made the words want to come. "Sarah was 8 months pregnant when it happened," he said finally. "We were driving to town for her doctor's appointment, arguing about baby names. She wanted something traditional, I wanted something unique." His hands clenched on the table. Such a stupid thing to argue about. Emma Grace said nothing, just waited with the patience of someone who understood that some stories had to be told in their own time. There was black ice on the bridge. Car coming the other way lost control, crossed the center line. Jackson's voice was flat, emotionless, the way he'd learned to tell the story to make it bearable. "I walked away with a few scratches. Sarah and the baby." He couldn't finish the sentence. "I'm sorry," Emma Grace whispered. "The thing is, I was driving. It should have been me." Jackson's voice cracked. Sarah had reflexes like a cat, would have seen that car coming sooner, would have known how to react, but I was distracted, arguing about names for a baby we'd never get to hold. Emma Grace reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. Her touch was warm, real, anchoring him to the present moment. "It wasn't your fault. That's what everyone says. Doctor, counselor, neighbors, friends. But if I'd been paying attention, if I'd been a better driver, a better husband..." Then you'd be carrying different guilt right now, Emma Grace said firmly. Trust me, I've spent enough time blaming myself for David's actions to recognize the pattern. Sometimes terrible things happen, and there's no one to blame, no way to make sense of it. The only choice is whether you let it destroy you or find a way to live with it. Jackson looked at their joined hands, surprised by how right it felt to have human contact again, to feel connected to someone who understood loss from the inside out. How do you live with it? Some days better than others. Emma Grace's thumb traced gentle circles on his knuckles. But I learned that healing isn't about forgetting the pain or pretending it didn't happen. It's about finding meaning in the survival, about honoring what you've lost by choosing to keep going. The storm was passing now, the thunder growing distant, but the rain continued to fall in steady sheets that turned the ranch yard into a temporary lake. Jackson found himself thinking about signs again, about the way Sarah had always believed that everything happened for a reason, even when that reason wasn't immediately clear. "Why do you think she sent you here?" he asked. Emma Grace considered the question seriously. "Maybe because she knew we both needed saving, just in different ways. You from the guilt that's been eating you alive, me from the fear that's been chasing me across 3 states. Think it'll work?" "I don't know." Emma Grace squeezed his hand before releasing it. "But for the first time in months, I feel like I can breathe again. Like maybe there's a future worth fighting for." Jackson nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. For 3 years he'd been going through the motions of living without actually being alive. But Emma Grace's arrival had shifted something fundamental, had reminded him that he was more than just a collection of regrets and what-ifs. "You can stay," he said suddenly. "As long as you need to. There's plenty of room, and the ranch could use someone who knows how to bring life back to dead spaces." Emma Grace's eyes widened, and for a moment she looked like she might cry. "You don't know anything about me. I could be lying about everything." "Could be," Jackson agreed. "But Sarah trusted you enough to send you here, and that's recommendation enough for me." Outside, the rain was beginning to taper off, and shafts of golden sunlight broke through the clouds, painting the landscape in shades of hope and possibility. Emma Grace stood and walked to the window, pressing her palms against the glass as she watched the storm clear. "I whispered a prayer into the wind this morning," she said softly. "Asked for just one more chance to find somewhere I could belong. One more chance to remember who I was before fear turned me into someone I didn't recognize." Jackson joined her at the window, close enough to smell the clean scent of rain in her hair. "What did you ask for exactly?" "Safety, purpose, maybe even love. Though that seemed like too much to hope for." She turned to look at him, and Jackson saw something new in her eyes, something that looked remarkably like hope. "I think the wind might have been listening. I think it might have been." Jackson agreed, and for the first time since Sarah's death, he found himself believing that tomorrow might actually be better than today. 3 weeks passed like pages turning in a book neither of them wanted to finish too quickly. Emma Grace settled into the rhythm of ranch life with the natural grace of someone who'd been searching for home without knowing what it looked like. She rose before dawn to help Jackson with morning chores, her city hands growing calloused and strong as she learned to handle feed buckets and repair fencing. In the evenings, she transformed the neglected kitchen into something that smelled like cinnamon and fresh bread, filling the house with warmth that had nothing to do with the wood-burning stove. Jackson found himself looking forward to conversations that stretched long into the night, discussions about everything from the migration patterns of elk to the way different kinds of pain could either break you or make you stronger. Emma Grace had a way of listening that made him want to share thoughts he'd kept buried for years, and her laughter had become the sound he most wanted to hear echoing through the rooms that had been silent for too long. But it was the small moments that surprised him most. The way she hummed while washing dishes, unconsciously swaying to music only she could hear. How she'd pause during their evening walks to pick up interesting stones or feathers, building a collection of treasures on the kitchen windowsill that caught and scattered the morning light. The gentle way she spoke to the horses, as if they were old friends sharing secrets. One crisp October morning, Jackson found her in the barn before sunrise, sitting cross-legged in Thunder's stall, with the massive draft horse's head resting peacefully in her lap. The sight stopped him cold. Not because it was dangerous, but because it was so impossibly right. Thunder was notoriously skittish around strangers, had barely tolerated Jackson's presence for the first year after Sarah's death. But here he was, calm as a lamb, while Emma Grace ran her fingers through his mane and whispered words too soft for Jackson to hear. "He's grieving too," she said without looking up, somehow sensing Jackson's presence. "Sarah's horse, isn't he?" Jackson nodded, throat tight. "She raised him from a colt. They had this connection I never understood. After she died, he wouldn't eat for weeks. Vet said there was nothing wrong with him physically, but I thought we might lose him anyway." Emma Grace's hand never stopped its gentle movement through Thunder's mane. Grief isn't just human. Animals feel loss just as deeply. They just don't have words to explain it. She finally looked up at Jackson, her eyes bright with unshed tears. He's been waiting for permission to heal. They all have. As if to prove her point, the other horses began gathering at their stall doors, nickering softly in a way Jackson hadn't heard since Sarah was alive. Storm, the temperamental mare who'd been Sarah's riding horse, actually extended her neck toward Emma Grace, something she'd never done for anyone else. "How do you do that?" Jackson asked, genuinely amazed. Emma Grace smiled, the expression transforming her face from merely pretty to absolutely radiant. "I spent a lot of years feeling broken myself. Broken things recognize each other, and sometimes that recognition is the first step toward healing." Later that morning, as they worked together to repair a section of fence damaged by the previous night's wind, Emma Grace brought up something that had been weighing on Jackson's mind for days. "I've been thinking about what comes next," she said, her voice carefully neutral as she held a fence post steady while Jackson hammered in the new supports. Jackson's hands stilled on the hammer. He'd been dreading this conversation, knowing it had to come but hoping somehow it wouldn't. "Found somewhere else to go?" Quote, "That's not what I mean." Emma Grace's grip tightened on the post. "I mean what happens when David finds me here. Because he will find me, Jackson. Men like him don't give up, they don't move on to easier targets. They keep hunting until they get what they want or until something stops them permanently." Jackson set down the hammer and turned to face her fully. "You think he's close? I've been getting that feeling again. The one that kept me alive for 2 years. Emma Grace's eyes scanned the horizon as if expecting to see a familiar car cresting the hill. Like someone's watching, waiting for the right moment. It might be paranoia, but paranoia is what's kept me breathing this long. Jackson felt the familiar surge of protective anger that had been building since the day she'd arrived. Let him come. This is my land, and I know every inch of it better than any city boy ever could. You don't understand. Emma Grace's voice was urgent now, almost pleading. David isn't just angry or possessive, he's smart, patient, dangerous in ways that go beyond physical violence. He's a successful prosecutor, Jackson. He knows how to manipulate systems, how to make himself look like the victim and me look like the unstable ex-wife who's been feeding people lies. Jackson studied her face, seeing the real fear there, the kind that came from experience rather than imagination. What would he do if he found you here? Emma Grace was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the mountains in the distance. He'd probably start by trying to convince you that I'm delusional, that I've been stalking him and making false accusations. He'd have documentation, witness statements, maybe even medical records, suggesting I'm mentally unstable. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. And if that didn't work, if you didn't believe him and send me away, he'd find another solution. A permanent one. The weight of her words settled between them, like a stone dropping into still water. Jackson had faced enemy combatants in Afghanistan, had stared down armed men who wanted nothing more than to kill him and everyone he served with. But this was different. This was about protecting someone who'd become important to him, someone whose loss would leave a hole in his chest that might never heal. There's something I need to tell you, Jackson said finally, about who I was before Sarah, before the ranch became my whole world. Emma Grace turned to face him fully, sensing the importance of whatever he was about to share. I did 3 tours overseas, special operations. My job was finding people who thought they were untouchable and proving them wrong. Jackson's voice was steady, matter of fact. I'm not the same man who couldn't save his wife from a car accident. When it comes to protecting what matters, I know exactly who I am. Something shifted in Emma Grace's expression, a combination of relief and worry. I don't want you to become someone you're not because of my problems. I'm not becoming someone different. Jackson picked up the hammer again, his movements deliberate and controlled. I'm just remembering who I used to be before guilt convinced me I was helpless. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the repetitive motions of fence repair providing a rhythm that helped settle Jackson's mind. He was already making plans, running through scenarios, cataloging the defensive advantages of the ranch's layout. It felt good to have a mission again, a purpose beyond just getting through each day. Jackson. Emma Grace's voice was soft, thoughtful. Can I ask you something personal? He nodded, though he kept his focus on the fence. Do you think Sarah would approve of this? Of me being here? Of what's growing between us? The question hit him like a physical blow. Not because it was unexpected, but because it voiced something he'd been wrestling with since the night he'd found himself wanting to hold Emma Grace's hand for reasons that had nothing to do with comfort or friendship. I think Sarah would want me to be happy, he said finally. But I also think she'd want me to be honest about what this is. And what is this? Jackson set down the hammer and turned to face her, seeing his own uncertainty reflected in her storm-colored eyes. I don't know yet. All I know is that for the first time in 3 years, I wake up looking forward to the day, instead of just enduring it. You make me want to be the man Sarah always believed I could be. Emma Grace's breath caught, and Jackson saw her struggling with emotions that were clearly as complicated as his own. I care about you too, more than I should, more than is probably smart given everything that's happening. But I'm scared, Jackson, scared that my feelings are just gratitude mixed with relief. Scared that I'm using you as a shield against David instead of learning to stand on my own. Maybe that's okay for now, Jackson said gently. Maybe sometimes we need someone else's strength while we're rebuilding our own. Doesn't make the caring less real. The sound of a vehicle approaching made them both freeze. Jackson's hand moved instinctively to the pistol at his hip, while Emma Grace went pale as winter frost. But it was just the mail truck, old Pete, making his weekly run up the mountain roads to deliver packages and gossip in equal measure. Afternoon, folks, Pete called out, his weathered face creasing into a smile as he climbed down from his truck. Got a registered letter here for Jackson Reid. Looks official. Jackson accepted the envelope with a growing sense of unease. The return address was from a law firm in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and his blood ran cold as he realized what it probably meant. Emma Grace saw his expression and knew immediately. He found me, she whispered. Jackson tore open the envelope and scanned the legal document inside, his jaw tightening with each line. Restraining order. Claims you've been harassing him, threatening violence, violating previous court orders. He looked up at her, his eyes blazing with fury. Says here you're considered armed and dangerous, possibly suffering from a psychological break. None of that is true, Emma Grace said, but her voice lacked conviction. I never threatened him, never violated any orders because there were never any orders to violate. I know. Jackson folded the papers and shoved them into his back pocket. Question is, how'd he find you here? Emma Grace's face crumpled as understanding dawned. The mail. I had some of my nursing school transcripts forwarded here last week. Thought I might try to get licensed in Montana. Start fresh. She laughed bitterly. I let him right to your door. Jackson stepped closer, taking her hands in his. Look at me, Emma Grace. This doesn't change anything. You're safe here, and you're staying here until we figure this out. You don't understand the position this puts you in, she protested. If he's convinced a judge I'm dangerous, if there's an official restraining order, you harboring me could be seen as aiding a fugitive. Let me worry about the legal implications. Jackson's voice was steel wrapped in velvet. Besides, something about this whole thing stinks. Restraining orders take time to process, require evidence, court appearances. How'd he get one issued so fast against someone who's been gone for months? Emma Grace blinked, hope flickering in her eyes. You think he falsified it? I think David McKenna is about to learn that Montana cowboys don't scare as easy as Oklahoma nurses. Jackson squeezed her hands gently. "And I think it's time I made some phone calls to people who know how to dig up the truth behind pretty lies." That evening, as storm clouds gathered over the mountains for another night of rain, Jackson stood on the porch watching Emma Grace brush thunder in the corral. The big horse stood perfectly still for her, ears forward, completely at peace in a way Jackson hadn't seen since Sarah's death. It struck him that healing wasn't always about forgetting the past or moving beyond it. Sometimes it was about finding someone who could help you carry the weight, who could see the good in you even when you'd forgotten it existed. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of rain and possibility. Emma Grace looked up from her grooming and smiled at him, and Jackson felt something shift in his chest, something that felt remarkably like hope. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and David McKenna was out there somewhere planning his next move. But tonight, watching this remarkable woman bring life back to his broken ranch, Jackson knew that some things were worth fighting for. The storm was coming, but they would weather it together. The phone call that changed everything came at 4 in the morning 3 days later. Jackson jolted awake to the sound of his cell phone buzzing against the nightstand, his military training, instantly bringing him to full alertness. The caller ID showed a number he recognized from his past life. Before grief had made him forget that he had friends who would move mountains for him. "Marcus," Jackson answered, sitting up in bed. "Tell me you found something." Marcus Webb had been Jackson's commanding officer in Afghanistan, a man who'd transitioned from special operations to private investigation with the same methodical precision he'd brought to hunting insurgents. When Jackson had called him 2 days ago asking for help digging into David McKenna's background, Marcus had taken the job without asking for details or payment. "Found something all right." Marcus's gravelly voice carried across the connection. "Your boy McKenna is dirty as they come, but he's smart about it. Took some serious digging to find the pattern." Jackson was already reaching for his jeans, knowing that whatever Marcus had discovered would require immediate action. What kind of pattern? 3 other women in the past 5 years. All filed restraining orders against him, all mysteriously withdrew them within weeks, all left town shortly after. 2 of them had quote-unquote accidents before they disappeared. Jackson's blood ran cold. What kind of accidents? Car trouble on isolated roads. House fires with questionable causes. One woman fell down her apartment stairs and spent 3 weeks in ICU. Marcus paused, and Jackson could hear the sound of papers rustling. "Here's the kicker. That restraining order he filed against your Emma Grace? It's fake. Doctored paperwork, forged judge's signature. But it's good enough to fool local law enforcement if they don't dig too deep." Jackson was already moving through the house, checking locks, peering out windows into the pre-dawn darkness. How long before he shows up here? Could be any time. One of my contacts in Oklahoma says McKenna took vacation time from the prosecutor's office starting yesterday. Bought a plane ticket to Billings under an assumed name. Marcus's voice turned serious. "Jackson, this guy isn't just abusive. He's a predator with a badge and connections. You need to be ready for anything." "Already am." Jackson checked his weapon, muscle memory guiding his hands through the familiar motions. "What about the fake restraining order? Can we use that against him?" "Working on it. Got a buddy in the FBI who owes me favors. But legal wheels turn slow. And if McKenna's already on his way, you might not have time to wait for official channels." Jackson thanked Marcus and ended the call, his mind already shifting into tactical mode. He moved quietly through the house, checking sight lines, identifying defensive positions, cataloging weapons and ammunition. The ranch house had been built by his grandfather, with an eye toward practicality and security. Thick log walls, limited access points, clear fields of fire in every direction. If David McKenna wanted a fight, he'd chosen the wrong battleground. A soft knock on his bedroom door interrupted his planning. "Jackson?" Emma Grace's voice was barely above a whisper. "I heard you on the phone. Is everything okay?" Jackson opened the door to find her standing in the hallway wearing one of Sarah's old robes, her dark hair tousled from sleep, her eyes wide with concern. The sight of her, vulnerable and trusting, strengthened his resolve in ways he hadn't expected. "We need to talk," he said gently. "Marcus found some things about David that you need to know." They sat at the kitchen table while Jackson made coffee with hands that were steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. Emma Grace listened without interruption as he relayed Marcus's findings, her face growing paler with each detail. "Other women," she whispered when he finished. "I always wondered if I was his first, but I told myself I was being paranoid." "You weren't paranoid, you were surviving." Jackson reached across the table to take her hand. "But now we know what we're dealing with, and we can be ready for him." Emma Grace pulled her hand away, standing abruptly, and beginning to pace the small kitchen. "No, absolutely not. I won't let you get hurt because of my problems. I should leave. Go somewhere else. Keep running." "Running didn't work before, and it won't work now." Jackson's voice was firm but gentle. "Marcus says David's escalating, which means he's not going to stop until someone stops him. Better it happens here, on ground I know, than in some place where you'd be completely vulnerable." "You don't understand what you're saying." Emma Grace's voice cracked with emotion. "David isn't just dangerous, he's ruthless. If he can't have me, he'll make sure no one else can either. That includes you, Jackson. That includes anyone who's helped me." Jackson stood and moved to her, placing his hands gently on her shoulders to stop her frantic pacing. "Look at me, Emma Grace. Really look at me." She lifted her eyes to his, and Jackson saw fear there, but also something else. Trust. Faith in his ability to protect her, even when she couldn't quite believe it herself. "I know you're scared," he said softly. "I know this feels impossible, but I spent 8 years hunting men who thought they were untouchable, who used fear and violence to control people who couldn't fight back. David McKenna might be smart, but he's never faced anyone like me." Emma Grace searched his face, seeing something there that made her shoulders relax slightly. "What do we do?" "First, we make sure you're safe. There's a storm shelter in the basement, built to withstand tornadoes. Steel reinforced, independent power supply, communication equipment. If things go bad, that's where you go, and you don't come out until I give you the all clear. And second," Jackson's smile was grim, reminding Emma Grace that beneath the gentle rancher was a warrior who'd seen combat and survived. "Second, we give Mr. McKenna a Montana welcome he'll never forget." The next 24 hours passed in a blur of preparation. Jackson moved through the ranch with military efficiency, setting up what he privately thought of as defensive measures, but what any casual observer would see as routine maintenance. Motion sensors disguised as wildlife cameras, strategically placed obstacles that would funnel vehicle traffic into predetermined zones, communication equipment that would allow him to coordinate with Marcus and local law enforcement if needed. Emma Grace threw herself into the preparations with surprising determination. Her nursing background proved invaluable as she assembled first aid supplies and prepared emergency protocols. More importantly, she seemed to be finding strength in having something concrete to do, in being part of the solution rather than just the victim waiting to be rescued. "I keep thinking about what you said," she told Jackson that evening as they shared what might be their last quiet dinner for a while. "About how broken things recognize each other." Jackson looked up from his barely touched steak, seeing something new in her expression. Not fear this time, but resolve. "I was broken when I got here," she continued. "Shattered into so many pieces I didn't know how to put myself back together. But these past weeks, working alongside you, helping bring life back to this place, I've remembered who I used to be. Who I still am underneath all the fear." "Who's that?" Jackson asked softly. Emma Grace's smile was fierce, beautiful, and absolutely fearless. Someone who doesn't run anymore. Someone who fights back. The sound of gravel crunching under tires reached them at the same moment the motion sensors Jackson had installed began triggering alerts on his phone. 2 vehicles, moving slowly up the ranch road with their headlights off, using the moonlight to navigate. "Time to go," Jackson said, his voice calm despite the adrenaline spike. "Remember what we practiced?" Emma Grace nodded, already moving toward the basement stairs. But she paused at the doorway, turning back to face him with tears shining in her eyes. "Jackson, if something happens to you because of me, I'll never forgive myself." "Nothing's going to happen to me," he promised, though they both knew it wasn't a promise he could guarantee. "And Emma Grace? When this is over, we're going to have a long conversation about what comes next. About whether you want to stay here permanently. Help me turn this ranch into something Sarah would be proud of. Is that a proposal? She asked, trying to inject some lightness into the moment. Maybe. Depends on your answer. Then you better make sure you survive to hear it, Emma Grace said, and then she was gone, disappearing into the basement sanctuary Jackson had prepared for her. Jackson moved through the darkened house with practiced stealth, checking his equipment one final time. Marcus had arrived that afternoon, positioning himself in the barn with a clear view of the approaching vehicles. Local sheriff's deputies were standing by 15 minutes away, ready to respond but far enough out to avoid spooking David into doing something reckless. The vehicles stopped at the main gate, and Jackson watched through night vision binoculars as 4 men climbed out. David McKenna was easy to identify from the photos Marcus had provided, tall and lean with the kind of practiced confidence that came from years of intimidating people in courtrooms. The other 3 men were clearly muscle, hired security, or off-duty cops looking to make extra money without asking too many questions. Jackson's radio crackled softly. Hawk 1 to base. Marcus's voice was barely audible. Target acquired. 4 hostiles, 2 moving to flank positions, 2 approaching front entrance. Recommend we let them come to us. Copy that, Hawk 1. Let them think they have the advantage. Jackson settled into position behind the thick log wall that faced the front door, his rifle steady and his breathing controlled. This was familiar territory, the calm focus that had kept him alive through multiple combat deployments. But this time, he wasn't fighting for abstract concepts like freedom or democracy. This time, he was fighting for Emma Grace, for the life they might build together, for the chance to honor Sarah's memory by protecting someone she had trusted him to save. The front door exploded inward with a crash that echoed through the house like thunder. David McKenna stepped through the wreckage with the arrogance of a man who'd never faced real consequences for his actions, his expensive suit somehow still immaculate despite the violence he'd just committed. Emma Grace, he called out, his voice carrying the false warmth of a practiced manipulator. I know you're here, sweetheart. I've come to take you home where you belong. Jackson remained silent, watching as David's hired muscle spread out through the house, with the clumsy efficiency of men who were used to intimidating civilians but had never faced real opposition. They were good enough to handle an unarmed woman or an unsuspecting victim, but Jackson could see a dozen tactical mistakes in their first 30 seconds. I know about the Cowboy too, David continued, his voice taking on an edge of anger. Some broken-down soldier who thinks he can play hero. Where is he, Emma? Did he already run when he realized what he was up against? That was when Jackson stepped out of the shadows, his rifle trained on David's center mass, his voice deadly calm in the sudden silence. I'm right here, he said, and I think it's time we had ourselves a talk. The silence that followed Jackson's words stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. David McKenna's carefully composed expression flickered for just a moment, revealing something raw and dangerous underneath the polished exterior. His 3 companions had frozen at the sight of Jackson's rifle, their hands hovering near their weapons but not quite committed to drawing them. Mr. Reid, I presume, David said, his courtroom voice smooth as silk, despite the tension crackling through the air. I believe you're harboring a fugitive, a deeply disturbed woman who's been making threats against me and my family. Jackson's aim never wavered. The only thing I'm harboring is someone who needed help. And the only disturbed person I see is the one who just broke down my front door in the middle of the night. David's laugh was cold, calculated. You don't understand the situation you found yourself in. Emma Grace is mentally unstable. She's been stalking me for months, making wild accusations, creating elaborate fantasies about our relationship. He reached slowly into his jacket, producing the forged restraining order. I have legal documentation of her harassment, witness statements, medical evaluations. Funny thing about documentation, Jackson said conversationally. My friend in the FBI says yours is fake. Forged signature, backdated filing, the whole 9 yards. Seems like you're not as clever as you think you are. For the first time, genuine surprise flickered across David's face. But it was quickly replaced by something much more dangerous. The mask of civilized authority slipped completely, revealing the predator that had been hiding underneath. "It doesn't matter what you think you know," David snarled. "By the time anyone sorts through the paperwork, you'll be dead, and Emma will be coming home with me, one way or another." Jackson felt the familiar calm of combat settle over him like an old coat. "That's where you're wrong. See, you made a mistake coming here. This is my land, my rules, and I've been killing men like you since before you figured out how to tie a tie." The radio on David's belt crackled with static, and Marcus's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Base," and Jackson with a courage that took his breath away. "The truth is that Jackson Reid is twice the man you'll ever be," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "He's shown me what real strength looks like, what real love feels like. He's taught me that I'm worth protecting, worth caring about, worth choosing every single day." David's laugh was ugly, broken. "How romantic. Too bad neither of you will live to enjoy your happily ever after." Jackson saw David's uninjured hand moving towards something concealed at his ankle, saw the glint of metal in the dim light. A backup weapon, probably a small pistol that his hired muscle had missed during their hurried entry. Jackson was already moving, trying to get a clear shot, but Emma Grace was directly in his line of fire. Time slowed to a crawl. As David brought the weapon up, his face twisted with the kind of hatred that could only end in death. Jackson shouted a warning, trying to push Emma Grace out of the way, but the confined space of the hallway worked against him. The shot, when it came, was deafeningly loud in the enclosed space, but it didn't come from David's weapon. Marcus had appeared in the doorway like a ghost, his own rifle speaking once with lethal precision. David McKenna crumpled to the floor, his backup plan dying with him on the hardwood that had witnessed 3 generations of Reid family history. "Target down," Marcus said calmly into his radio. "Scene secure." The next few hours passed in a blur of emergency responders, crime scene investigators, and official statements. Jackson found himself answering the same questions over and over again, while EMTs treated the wounded hired muscle and the coroner's team dealt with David's body. The fake restraining order and Marcus's investigation had provided enough evidence to paint a clear picture of self-defense, but the wheels of justice ground slowly even when the facts were obvious. Emma Grace sat on the porch steps, wrapped in a blanket that one of the deputies had given her, watching the controlled chaos unfold around her. She looked exhausted but somehow lighter, as if a weight she'd been carrying for years had finally been lifted from her shoulders. Jackson finished giving his statement to the lead investigator and walked over to sit beside her. Neither of them spoke for a long moment, content to simply be alive, to be together, to be free. "Is it really over?" Emma Grace asked finally. Jackson nodded, putting his arm around her shoulders and pulling her close. "It's over. David's dead, his accomplices are going to prison, and you're safe. You're finally safe." Emma Grace leaned into his warmth, allowing herself to believe for the first time in years that she might actually have a future worth living. "What happens now?" Jackson was quiet for a moment, thinking about Sarah's letter, about the chain of events that had brought Emma Grace to his doorstep, about the way love could bloom even in the darkest soil. "Now we heal, we rebuild. We figure out what comes next, one day at a time." "Together?" Emma Grace's voice was small, hopeful. "Together," Jackson confirmed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "If you'll have me." Emma Grace pulled back to look at him, her storm-colored eyes bright with tears and possibility. "Are you sure?" "I come with a lot of baggage, a lot of complicated history." Jackson smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "We all come with baggage. The trick is finding someone who's willing to help you carry it." As dawn began to break over the Montana mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Emma Grace whispered another prayer into the wind. Not a plea for rescue this time, but a prayer of gratitude for second chances, for the courage to fight back, for the unexpected love that had saved them both. The wind carried her words across the ranch land that would soon be her home, past the horses that had already accepted her as family, up to the mountains where Sarah Reid's spirit seemed to smile down on the healing that was taking place in the house she had loved. Some stories end with death and destruction. Others end with the promise that tomorrow can be better than yesterday. that broken hearts can mend stronger than before, that love really can conquer fear when it's backed by the courage to stand and fight. This was one of the latter stories, and it was just beginning. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.